In this illustration, I wanted to create a tile set of pixel art. This technique that I'm using, you can also use for building a game world. All you need to do in that instance is crop the textures separately and upload them to whatever game maker you are using in PNG format or TGA, but PNG is the most commonly used asset for video game engines because it includes transparency. I started with 280 x 280 square canvas. Even numbers are important so that the scaling at the end works perfectly. For this I wanted to have a little bit more resolution because I wanted the camera to be zoomed out a little bit more so that you would see more of the environment and get a sense of what the world is like. Also because I'm using these pixel art tile sets, I don't have to spend as much time creating every single corner because I can use the existing assets. In the beginning, I block out the colors that I want to use for the scene, and this can be done with any brush that you have in your library. I'm using a basic round brush just because it keeps the colors relatively clean. None of this sketch is going to be visible in the final piece, but this is kind of a basic layout for me to understand what kind of elements do I need in the picture. So for example, when I'm making a dark green dot on the canvas, that is just a mental reminder for me that I need trees, and that's all that is there for. And I'm gonna color pick some of these blobs later, but all of it is going to be covered by these tiles that I'm making. So this is kind of a checklist for the kind of items that I'm going to need to do for the tile set. After this phase is done, I'm switching to the pixel art brush. And if you want to make pixel art brush for yourself, you have free instructions in this video that I'm gonna give card to right now. And I'm using that same brush to create all of these assets in this video. After this blocking is done, I'm creating this grid of 16 x 16 pixels. And these squares are my basic tile size. So not all elements are going to fit within this box, but I'm gonna make every one of these assets so that they can be copy and pasted using this kind of scale. And because this is an illustration, not a video game, tiling is not as important, but when creating these assets, it's easy to check how well they work together by just copying them together horizontally and vertically and seeing how the pixels align with each other on the other side. And every time you're using the move tool to scale or rotate objects, I recommend having the nearest neighbor on. This is very important. So many people have asked me about the pixel art tutorial that I made, that how can I get the pixels look crisp and sharp in the end. And in that video, in the end, I described that when you are scaling the image up after you are done with this work in pixel art scale, use the nearest neighbor transformation mode to scale up the image, and it will be just as crisp as you are working on it. But if you have bilinear or bicubic on, that will create those blurry images, and you cannot scale up using the resize canvas mode. That will scale the canvas in either bilinear or bicubic mode. So you have to scale it up manually yourself using the nearest neighbor, and that keeps the pixels very crisp. But same applies for when you're doing pixel art and you're moving around the objects. It's just safer to have the nearest neighbor on to keep the pixels very crisp. Because this illustration has a lot of items, it's important to have proper naming for your layers. And I don't name all the layers, but I name all of the items that are part of this tile set. So for example, the rock, the tree, the fence, those flowers, and so on, they are all on their own layer with that name, so it's easy for me to find that specific item when I need, for example, a rock or a tree to be copy and pasted all over the illustration. And all of these items are in the same layer group. I keep this layer group clean, meaning that they are the original source files for these tiles. I don't use them as part of the illustration, but when I, for example, want to draw a bridge to the illustration, I take that bridge tile and I drag it out of that layer group on its own separate layer, so that I keep the original items intact and without editing, so that I can always use more of those and I don't mess up accidentally the original source file layer of that item. When I'm copy and pasting these items all over the illustration, I'm also using transform tool to flip them horizontally or just rotating them. And this gives them a little bit more variety so that it doesn't look just as copy pasted. But for this illustration, because I'm going for that retro video game look, I don't really mind that they are copy pasted. I think it's part of the charm, and that's why I don't try to avoid that look too much. Also, not all game engines work on this sort of like rigid grid. Sometimes you have freedom to place items as decorations in the middle, and because this is just an illustration, I am not using the grid 100%. For example, when I'm placing decoration items, like for example these flowers, that gives them a bit more organic look while still maintaining that copy and pasted look at the same time. So it's kind of, for me, the best of both worlds. And I just like the way that this is coming along, because 16 by 16 pixels, that's small square, that's not too many pixels to make any type of image into, so that those don't take that much time. And when you have this like tile set of different pixel art of different items, it's so much fun to build this world because it just comes together so quickly, and I could easily make like 4 other illustrations in fraction of the time that it took to create this, because now I have these items and I already have few of these images that are kind of similar daytime forest type of pixel art illustrations. So if I ever want to return to this topic, I'm definitely going to use this tile set and just have more fun with it, because when you are creating this type of world, it becomes interesting to see that what would be happening in that direction or what's behind that corner, and then you have so much like these assets that you have created yourself that you can just go out there and visually explore that. I think that's super interesting. And this was all moving along quite nicely. Then something happened. And this is what happened. I created this chicken, and then I created these other chickens. I thought that I was almost done. The illustration honestly looked quite finished. And I thought that I am on time to make this video, and I will probably have it up by Tuesday or something, so I can keep to some sort of regular upload schedule. And then this chicken happened, and I thought that I want to make the chicken jump. At this time it was already like the middle of the night. I was up all night making this animation of the chicken jumping, and it honestly took so much time. I'm still quite slow at this animation process. All of these 3 chickens, I had to make them all jump around for whatever reason. Honestly, this conversation was going on in my head all the time, that Mikko, you need to stop this and you need to make a video about this, stop animating the picture. But then the other voice in my head said that like, I like chicken, I want to make the chicken jump, and somehow that voice won out. The next morning I was just completely wasted because I had like 0 sleep. Honestly, I don't regret it at all, because I love the jumping chicken in this piece. I think it's the best thing about the whole thing. That's why this whole piece is animated, because somehow I needed to see that in my head, and I don't regret it. I wasted a lot of time doing it, but I don't regret it. About the animation, when you go to the animation toolbar, if you create a layer and in that frame of that animation, if you click set as foreground, you can create yourself animation guides. So for example, these arcs of the chicken jumping and especially the swimming fish in the water. I created these sort of guidelines for the direction of that movement on the top layer. So when I was animating every single frame, I could follow that line of movement, and that makes the movement look so much smoother than if I were just to guess it. I guess this is something that comes naturally to like very good animators, but for somebody who's relatively new to animating anything, this is a huge help and it's such a time saver. When creating this animation, whenever I start a new element, I go into the gallery mode and I made a duplicate of the entire canvas, and then I continue that new work in the new canvas, because in case some animation element, like for example a water splashing, goes completely wrong and I don't like it, I can always revert back to that previous canvas, because there's so many steps that it's just easier to go back to a different duplicate of the entire canvas than trying to undo 150 times and guess where you left the work at that point. Also, because you have those pixel art tile sets in that layer group that you created in the beginning, I recommend also at that point to make a duplicate and have that to be safe from your other edits, so that in case you accidentally merge some layers that you're not supposed to merge, just have it as a separate so that those original tiles are saved. If you want to make this tile set into PNGs, I recommend that you create all of the items into the same square or in the same squares in the middle of the picture. This is because if you want to export them as PNGs, you can just use this zone so that you can crop the entire image around those tiles and then long press each layer and then export it as PNG. There is also this option of export layers as PNGs separately, but personally I have found that sometimes it skips some layers, so I don't 100% trust that feature quite yet. Maybe it works well in a low resolution picture like this, but just as a precaution, I recommend making all of the items in a single stack so that it's easy to crop and export as different files. Let me know in the comments below if you intend on using this sort of tile set mentality to create any illustrations, or if it's just a waste of time. But for me, I like this retro look and I'm probably going to do this again sometime. When building the world, that part was super fun, but the animation, I don't know. I understand that I might have gone completely overboard and lost my mind with that part of this whole process, and I'll be back with more art and pixel art tutorials later on this channel. I'll see you guys later. I'm Mikko. Go and draw awesome stuff. Bye.